John chapter 4. And so Jesus came to a city of Samaria called Sychar, near the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. And Jacob's well was there. And Jesus, therefore being weary from his journey, was sitting by the well. It was about the 6th hour. And there came a woman of Samaria to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." His disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. And the Samaritan woman therefore said to him, "How is it that you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink, since I'm a Samaritan woman?" You see, Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. And Jesus answered and said to her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it was who says to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." And she said, "Sir, you don't have anything to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you think you'll get this living water? You're not greater than our father Jacob, are you, who gave us this well and drank from it himself and his sons and his cattle?" And Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will thirst again. But whoever drinks the water that I will give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall become in him a well of water springing up to eternal life." And the woman said, "Well, give me this water so that I'll not be thirsty, and I'll never have to come all the way out here to draw water again." And he said to her, "Well, go, call your husband and come here." The woman answered and said, "I have no husband." Jesus said, "That's exactly right. You have no husband. You've had 5 husbands, and the one you're with now isn't your husband. You've truly spoken." And Jesus then said, the woman said to Jesus, "Sir, I perceive you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and you people say, the Jews, that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, an hour is coming when neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem shall we worship the Father. But you worship that which you do not know. We worship that which we do know. Salvation is from the Jews." It's through the Jewish lineage. It's through the Christ. It's through the commandments. "But an hour is coming, and it is now arrived, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. And such people the Father seeks to be his worshipers, because our God is a spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth." And the woman said, "I know Messiah is coming, the Christ. And when he comes, he'll declare, teach all things, clarify all things to us." And Jesus said to her, "I am he." Wow. Living waters. In verses 7 through 15 of this beautiful encounter, one of the most bone-chilling to me of all the encounters that Jesus has with people in his earthly ministry, he chooses a Samaritan woman to be the first person to whom he makes the announcement, "I am the Christ." I love that. Not only is it a Samaritan, people that the Jews, the religious elites, thought weren't worthy, but it was a woman. And men, Jewish men in particular, just did not speak or give that kind of credibility to women in that era. Boy, Jesus showed something about the truth, didn't he? Who it is for and what it is for. In those verses 7 through 15, he speaks to her about a understanding of God that would be described well as living waters. Something that would change the way you think, change your sustenance. No longer are you simply maintaining your life through the physical water that is drawn, but you now have a deeper well. Something that sustains you forever in a spiritual sense. And the woman wanted this. The idea that I could have a relationship with God, a living water. I don't know that she understood that's what he was offering her, was the relationship, but that's what I want. Something that would change the very way that I live, so that I wouldn't have to walk all this way to get water every day. And boy, my life would be so different. Yeah, it is when God comes. Always is. How do I get that? She wants to know. How do I change who I am? Are there any of you in this audience today for that reason? A few weeks ago, somebody submitted a letter to me and they said, "I really want to sit down because I want to rediscover my faith. I want to find my faith." That's what they were asking. Living waters. What I want is the water that changes the way I live, the way I think. That's what this woman wanted. And some of you in this audience today are wanting the same things. And the mission of this whole congregation is to seek those people who are looking for that living water. but here's the problem. Jesus knows what stands between you, not the guy next to you, and the living water that will totally transform the way you live. He knows what it is. And the problem I have to share with you today is it is extremely personal. Because the next thing out of Jesus' mouth is, well, go get your husband and bring him back. Uh-oh, as Steve said. Uh-oh. There's a problem. This woman is living in a sinful relationship. The conversation gets very personal. What is standing between her and the living water? That idol in her life. That thing that she just can't quite give up. And there are a lot of people who come to God and they have long conversations just like this woman. But the question remains, and it's the primary question. Are you willing to dig deep in your life and see whatever it is that stands between you and God, the living waters? I think that this is a completely spiritually, divinely planned event. And I don't think it's any accident that Jesus chose someone that had a marriage problem to describe what stood between them and God. So what does she do? You see, Jesus is great at cutting to the heart of issues, isn't he? Oh, man. Every time he encounters someone, he lifts it to the highest level. You really want living water? Oh, yeah, fantastic. That's what I want. Great. Fix your life. The Word of God will always do this. Hebrews 4:12 says that it is living and active and sharper than a two-edged sword, piercing asunder between the joints and the marrow. Try and do that with a scalpel. It discerns between the thoughts and the intentions of the heart. You know how piercing the Word of God is? It will, if you allow it to, will lay bare your true motives so that you can't run from them if you dare look at them. If you dare. You talk about looking in a mirror. James says that we need to look into the law of liberty, the perfect mirror, and see ourselves for what we really, really are. Do you have the courage to do that? Do you want the living water bad enough to make the time and take the time to take the look? So what does the woman do? She does what we do. The woman, verse 19, said to him, "Sir, I perceive you're a prophet. You know, our fathers used worship in this mountain here, and you all say it's supposed to be in Jerusalem." You know what she does? Let's dive deep into some theology. That's what we need to do. Forget my husband's issues. That's kind of, let's just forget that. Let's just dive into theology. Because I don't want to deal with me. Why do you think we like having classes that go so deep into prophecy? Sorry, Bill and Ron, I'm not knocking the class. I'm simply saying, why do we want to study Daniel? Because that's easier than studying the marriage problem you got. That's why. Not this morning? All right. I'll have to watch the class later. But do you agree with me that we have created church families that are built around knowledge rather than built around dealing with what really is standing between people and God? And so we put PhDs in the pulpit because they got to know a lot, right? And isn't that the whole purpose of this, is to know? Knowledge? We've got to stop studying topics out of mere curiosity and start studying things that have personal significance. There's a driving thought all through Paul's letters to Timothy. In 1 Timothy 1:4, he said, "Timothy, do not pay attention to myths and endless genealogies. They just give rise to speculation rather than furthering the actual control of God, which is by faith." And then he says in chapter 4 and verse 7 of that same book, "Point this out to the brothers. Nourish them on the words of faith and sound doctrine, but have nothing to do with worldly fables that are fit only for old women." I'm sorry, I didn't write that. Or chapter 6, verse 4, understand that people get away from truth and they're conceited. They don't understand nothing. All they want to do is, they just have this, quote, morbid interest in controversial questions. They want to argue about words. What does it say in the Greek? What does it say in the Hebrew? What does it say in the Septuagint? What does it say and how is it in this translation? They just do this, engage in this and dispute about this, and all it does is create, quote, envy, strife, abusive language, you idiot, evil suspicions, friction between men that have depraved minds and who are deprived of the truth because they think godliness is a means of gain. Then in 2 Timothy, he doesn't stop. He goes on in chapter 2 and verse 23 and he says this, refuse foolish and ignorant speculations. All they do is produce quarrels. And then in chapter 4 and verse 4, he says, there's a generation coming that will turn from truth, and all they're going to do is want to discuss the myths. All they're going to want to do is discuss the questions, the theology. That's the woman at the well. Oh, by the way, instead of dealing with my personal problems that are standing between me and God, let's talk about where we ought to go to worship. Let's talk about worship. You know the irony? She picked a theological topic that she thought would lead Jesus away from her personal sin. How more remote can you get from who am I sleeping with than where do you reckon we ought to go to worship? Doesn't that seem about as far away as you can possibly get? What about worship? She spun the conversation to what she thought was the least intimate question she probably could have asked theologically. Boy, was she ever wrong. She didn't realize that this question was at the heart of her personal issue as well, worship. Because what is worship about? Lordship. Who's your Lord? You don't worship something that you don't respect and you don't honor. In fact, honor and worship go hand in hand. Churches of our Lord today, congregations make the same mistake. We focus on worship, but we're not thinking about it from lordship, which would change how you lived. We think about its form. And so, people come to Remington Ridge, and one of the big talks around town is, do you know that those people over there only meet on Sunday mornings? That can't be biblical, can it? I mean, you just can't worship just once. That cannot be biblical, can it? Hebrews 10:25, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together. That's got to be more than once a week, doesn't it? And so they argue about that kind of nonsense. Or how? They do a lot of weird stuff. I mean, you ought to just see the way they do their sermons without invitations being offered, and it's just weird. I can't go over there because they just don't do that. I mean, I'm just not comfortable with that. Well, what about who you're sleeping with? You reckon maybe that ought to start the conversation rather than whether we offer an invitation or not? Why are we hung up on the secondary stuff? Because we don't want to look at the real stuff. Just like us, this woman was focusing on minors instead of majors. It is about form and function. John 4:24, they that worship must worship in spirit and in truth. But have you ever wondered, you could have put either one first. You could have said that worship is in truth and spirit. God is spirit, and they that worship must worship in truth and spirit. I can make an argument that that's the right order. If you don't do it in truth, in other words, according to the pattern that God has established, then the spirit doesn't matter. But then I can successfully argue that spirit ought to go first, because if you don't have the right attitude, it doesn't matter if you have the right form. Could have done either way, right? But why the order if they're of equal importance? Isn't it interesting, though, that they put spirit first? In Matthew 5:23 and 24, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount teaches this lesson. He says, if you're presenting your offering at the altar, there's worship, by the way, and you remember that your brother has something against you, you leave your offering before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and make your offering. Why? Because our attitude and spirit in worship is foremost. There are people, please do not misunderstand, please give me some latitude here. And if you don't understand what I'm trying to say, please ask me afterward. Long before God gets around to judging us on the form of worship, he's going to judge us on the spirit. I'm not saying one's more important than the other. I'm simply saying without the right spirit, I don't care what form you have. It's of no use in the kingdom. This people, though, honors me with their lips, he said in Matthew 15:8-9, but their hearts are far away from me because they honor me or try to honor me with their teachings, which are according to men's desires rather than mine. So the form is important, but it's all about worship. It's all about worship, and worship is about lordship. Who's your Lord? And when you ask the question, who is God to me? You can only answer it by looking into your own life, and that's what Jesus was getting the woman at the well to do. You really want me, God says? Then I'll tell you what. Let's take a real good look at you. Jesus, if we want to use a modern kind of analogy, is courting this woman to come into his relationship with him. Because you know what? He wants her to be his bride. Do you understand that? And that is not figurative. He literally is calling her into being the bride of Christ. He's inviting her into the church. He's inviting her into relationship with him. And we are the bride of Christ. Is that not what Ephesians 5 says? Come to me, he says. And she says, well, what do I have to do to accomplish that? And he says, well, first thing you got to do is stop sleeping with everybody else. That's very personal, Jesus. Well, I don't know about you, but when I got ready to marry this woman over here 40 years ago, this August, we had a conversation just about like that. And she probably was the one that initiated it. Who do you plan on sleeping with the rest of your life? And what does that look like? And do you understand what I expect from you? Do you realize the intimacy is connected to our devotion to each other? Do you understand the parameters of this relationship? Do you love me enough that all the other things slide away? Is there anyone else that's going to be in front of me or before me in this relationship? Because if it is, I want to know right now. That's what Jesus is saying to the woman. That's what he's saying to you right now. Mike, I really want to rediscover my faith. Great. Who are you sleeping with? Real worship is a confirmation of who your God is, your God. In Deuteronomy chapter 4, that great passage where they are receiving the law, it says in verses 15 through 20, watch yourselves carefully, since you did not see any form on the day the Lord spoke to you at Horeb in the midst of the fire. But don't act corruptly and make a graven image for yourself in any figure, in the likeness of a male or a female, in the likeness of an animal that is on the earth, in the likeness of a bird that flies in the sky, in the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, of any likeness of any fish that is in the water below the earth. Beware lest you lift up your eyes to the heaven and you look at the sun and the moon and the stars and all the host of heaven, and you be drawn away to worship them and to think about serving them. Those are the things that God has allotted to all the people under the earth. But don't you forget me. I'm the one who brought you out of the iron furnace, out of Egypt, to be a people for my own possession. Today, watch yourselves, lest you forget me. Verse 23. And whatever you do, do not make for yourself any graven image in any form of anything against which the Lord your God has commanded you, because I am a consuming fire and a jealous God. Wow. No other gods before me. What's an idol? See, people read that passage and they say, well, no worries. We don't have any idols today. There's no image. We didn't make a bowl and worship it or make a fish and worship it, or we didn't take some man and like Caesar's did and others and make statues of them and bow down and worship them. Really? We don't do that? We don't do that. What's an idol? An idol is anything that is more important to you than God is. An idol is anything that absorbs your heart and the imaginations of your heart more than God does. When I read Psalm 42, it says, as the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs after you. You alone, the song says, are my heart's desire. I long to worship you. That's what worship is. I want this. I want him. I want her so badly that I'll do anything to justify it. That's what the woman at the well was saying. I don't want to deal with the guy I'm sleeping with because, you know what? I want God, but I'm not giving up this. And so what do? We justify this in a million different ways rather than eliminating the one we're sleeping with that's getting between us and God. That's what we do. We do it all the time. Anything you seek that can only give, that only God can give you, and you try to find that in it, that's an idol. Where do you find your purpose? Where do you find your identity? Where do you find your passion? Where do you find your life? What are you known for? That's your God. Idolatry is about order. What was the woman's God? Look at the story. What was the woman's God? Jesus is pointing out that at this moment in time, your God, the idol, the thing that you put above everything else is this relationship with this guy. And you got to make your mind up. Are you willing to trade that for me? Look, folks, I'm not one of these guys that's going to stand in a pulpit and tell you you can have it all. It's kind of like that lie that's perpetrated on women today. You can have it all. You can have the profession, you can have the house, you can have the job, you can have the husband, you can have it all. You can have every bit of it. And then they'll always quote Proverbs. Look at all the things the woman in Proverbs did. She didn't do it all at once. There are seasons in life. If she did do it all at once, she was one tired lady when her head hit the pillow at night. But you know what God says? He doesn't say you can have all the things of the world. Like Blair said a minute ago. You got to choose. You got to make your mind up. Who's your God going to be? Who are you going to worship? Who's first? What matters most? Who was her God? He took the form of a man in that case. Remember what I just read out of Deuteronomy 4? Because it was that guy back in the village that she really didn't want to talk about because she didn't really think she wanted to give him up in exchange for this God, for this living water. Who's yours? What's your order in life? I said in 2 Timothy that Paul had a lot of warnings to Timothy about keeping order. In the 3rd chapter, verses 1 through 7, he says this. It's a trustworthy statement, and he's really trying to point out that in our relationship to God, it is so easy and it is predictable that the further away we get from Christ in time, the more difficult it's going to be for us to stay loyal. Realize this, in the last days, by the way, you and I are living in the last days, 2 Timothy 3:1. It will become very difficult. Why? Because men will become lovers of self. Lovers of self. What do we idolize today? One of the greatest things we idolize in our culture today is ourselves. It's all about me. One of the greatest fallacies, I think, of modern psychology in trying to help people repair the holes that are in their lives is the effort to try to teach them that the first thing they have to do is feel good about themselves and put themselves first. Forgive themselves and take care of themselves first. That's not biblical at all. The Bible says put the Lord first. You know what's amazing? When you do that, all the other stuff about you becomes so insignificant, you realize it's all just placed on an altar. Lovers of self. How about the second one? Lovers of money. He didn't say likers, lovers. Lovers. When I use the phrase lovers, what does that say to you? It speaks about intimacy and relationship and dedication and loyalty. It speaks of all of those things. Lovers of money. Yeah, there are some people that idolize the dollar. In fact, Paul will tell Timothy, tell the brothers not to trust in the uncertainty of riches, but rather in the living God who richly supplies all their needs. He also said, those who desire to become rich, and you notice he didn't say those who were rich necessarily, he just said they desired to become rich. Idolatry is not just about what you possess, it's about what you pursue. In fact, idolatry is all about what you pursue, not what you possess. Verse 3, unloving, irreconcilable, malicious gossips, without self-control. Without self-control, I see the woman at the well again. We're in a world that is filled with and obsessed with the pursuit of sexual satisfaction. It's around us everywhere. It's in advertisements, it's on television, it's on the internet, it's available, it is everywhere, 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 and don't think it's new. The woman at the well. Who are you sleeping with? Verse 4, lovers of pleasure, he says, lovers of pleasure. Where do you spend your time? Who's your God? You can say, look, here's what I'm trying to drive home. And if you're visiting with us today, you're already saying, my goodness. But look, I don't really care what you're saying. I want to know what you're doing. Because you can tell me anything. And it's like our politicians, like I said last week. They'll spend every moment till they're blue in the face trying to convince you, tell you, use words to try to tell you something is true when you know with your own eyes it's a lie. But that's how Satan works on you too. Oh, I'm a good man, I'm a good woman, I'm a good person, I do this, I do that, in my heart, blah, 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 blah. What are you doing? Because your words pale by comparison to how you choose to live. Where do you spend your time? Where do you spend your time? Do these words describe you and your passion for Christ? Or do they describe your passion for something else? Philippians 3:7. Whatever was gain to me, whatever I had in my life that was of any value, and he's just listed all of the attainments and blessings God had given him, who he was, his education, what he'd learned. He listed all of it. And then he says this, whatever was gain to me, these things I counted as garbage for the sake of what? I want to say Christ. But what do you have to put in there? For the sake of my job? For the sake of fish? Oh, people don't worship fish. You want to bet? You know how many people are out fishing right now instead of worshiping the Lord? Yeah. Sports? Boy, next week's sermon's Father's Day. For the sake of what? I press on toward the goal for the prize of what? That's Philippians 3:14. I press on toward the goal. What's the goal in your life? For this prize, which is what? Financial independence? Physical health? Go to the gym every day? Fame? To be an NFL linebacker? I press on toward the goal for the prize of what? You pick. As the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs after you, O God. What do you put in there? My soul thirsts for what? When shall I possibly come and appear in the presence of this goal, this pursuit? What? I'm tired of changing the subject. It's time for us to ask the very serious question. Who are you sleeping with?